Here's a question that might sound a little blunt, but it's a fair one. If foreign aid actually works, why haven't we solved global poverty by now? For more than 60 years, wealthy nations have poured trillions of dollars into helping poorer ones. And yet, extreme poverty is still a massive, persistent problem. So, what's really going on here?
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we're going to get a handle on the unbelievable amount of money we're talking about. Then, we'll look at the simple theory of how aid is supposed to work. From there, we'll dig into the real-world evidence, figure out why economic growth keeps stalling, and finally, we'll look at what's happening now that this whole system is changing in a big way.
So, to really understand this paradox, you first have to wrap your head around the sheer scale of the money involved. And honestly, the numbers are just mind-boggling. Yeah, you're seeing that right. Over $1 trillion. And get this, that's just the amount that's gone to sub-Saharan Africa. It's an absolutely colossal investment that has produced a result that is, well, frankly, confusing. And this right here, this is the core of the problem. Despite that $1 trillion investment, the actual number of people living in extreme poverty there has gone up. It flies in the face of all logic, and it really forces us to ask a tough question. Are we just fundamentally getting this wrong?
Okay, so let's rewind and look at the original idea. Because on paper, the logic behind foreign aid is actually incredibly simple and it sounds great. But before we get into that, let's be super clear on what kind of aid we're talking about.
We're not talking about, sending water and supplies after an earthquake. That's short-term humanitarian relief. No, we're focused on long-term development aid, the kind that's meant to build up a country's economy so it can eventually thrive on its own. The whole point is to solve one very specific problem.
You see, a lot of poor economies are stuck in what economists call a poverty trap. The economy doesn't produce much, which means people can't save any money. If there are no savings, there's no money to invest in things like better tools, roads, or schools. And with no investment, the economy stays weak. It's this brutal, vicious cycle. And that's exactly where aid is supposed to come in.
The whole idea is that aid acts like a jumpstart. It's that external jolt of cash needed to break the cycle. You use it to invest in the basic infrastructure and tools that let the country's own economic engine finally turn over, start running, and eventually charge its own battery. It's a simple, elegant theory. So what happens when you try it in the real world? Well, lucky for us, we've got decades of data to see if that engine ever really started. And the results, they're complicated. The key takeaway is that aid seems to do one thing pretty well, but it fails at its single most important ultimate goal. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. On one hand, aid has been fantastic at treating the symptoms of poverty. It absolutely saves lives when it's targeted at things like health. But on the other hand, it has largely failed to cure the underlying disease, the lack of a self-sustaining economy. And let's be really clear, these successes are incredible. We are talking about millions of people living longer, healthier, more dignified lives thanks to specific, targeted programs. These are huge wins, no doubt about it. But, and this is the big but, they don't mean the country's economy is now fixed. And this really gets to the heart of it. A massive review that looked at over 100 different academic studies came to a stark conclusion. When you zoom out and look at the big picture, all that aid money has had pretty much zero measurable effect on broad economic growth. The jumpstart isn't working. The engine isn't turning over. So, why not?
Well, it turns out there are a few key reasons why this great-sounding theory just breaks down in practice. And the first one is a real painful irony. Sometimes the help itself actually hurts.
It's a concept called crowding out. I mean, just imagine for a second you're a local farmer or you make clothes. How are you possibly supposed to compete when a foreign organization shows up and starts handing out your exact product for free? You can't. Your business dies, and along with it, local jobs and any chance of building a homegrown industry.
A classic and honestly tragic example of this is the textile industry in many parts of Africa. All those well-intentioned donations of used clothes from the West absolutely decimated local manufacturers. One study found that it accounted for half the drop in employment in that industry over 2 decades. Instead of building an industry, the aid completely replaced it. Okay, the next problem is how these projects get done. You see, there's a huge difference between development that's done by a country and development that's done to a country. Too often, a foreign company flies in, builds a bridge with its own foreign workers, and then leaves. The country gets a bridge, sure, but nobody there actually learned how to build one. It just creates a cycle of dependency. And that leads to the shocking reality of what people call phantom aid. We all assume aid money goes to the country that needs it, right? Well, take a look at this. Only about 12% of USAID's funding goes directly to local organizations on the ground. The vast majority of it goes to big, US-based contractors.
And hey, don't just take my word for it.
The former head of USAID herself, Samantha Power, pointed this out, calling it an aid industrial complex. It's a known flaw in the system, where a lot of the money just circles right back to the donor country instead of building up skills and capacity where it's needed.
And finally, there's a problem with incentives. Most of these contracts pay for activities, not for results. This creates a totally backward incentive where contractors are rewarded for making projects more complex and expensive, not for actually solving the problem efficiently and effectively. A staggering 98% of USAID grants aren't based on performance.
This quote from an internal USAID report says it all. There's basically no penalty for failure. Contractors got paid the full amount, even when the projects didn't work. When you have a system that rewards bureaucracy instead of impact, it's no wonder the economic engine stalls.
So because of all these problems, we're now seeing something we haven't seen in modern history. For the first time, Western governments are making massive cuts to their foreign aid budgets. This is creating a completely new situation, one with enormous risks, but also maybe, just maybe, a real opportunity.
And let's be real, the immediate risk is terrifying. Suddenly cutting off aid that people rely on for basic survival could disrupt essential services and throw millions back into poverty. But on the flip side, this withdrawal could finally create the space for local industries to grow without being choked out. It might force governments to become more accountable to their own citizens instead of to foreign donors.
But this all leads to one final massive question. Foreign aid was never just about charity. It's always been a tool of foreign policy, of soft power. So as the West pulls back, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Other global powers are more than ready to step in and fill that void. The ultimate question isn't just whether aid will continue, but whose version of it is going to shape the 21st century.